Winter is gently knocking, and the soft glow of Christmas is just around the corner. Tonight, I invite you, especially the wonderful women who have lived through many seasons, to rest your heart for a while. Hold a warm drink between your hands, settle into a quiet space, and listen with me. If this story touches you, please like, share, and pass its warmth to someone dear to you. I had spent the entire morning getting ready slowly, deliberately, savoring each motion like a prayer. At 74, I no longer rushed for anyone, not anymore. But today was different. My grandson Luca's wedding, the first wedding of the new generation, the kind of milestone a grandmother waits decades for. I chose the lavender silk dress I'd kept sealed in a garment bag for 8 long years, saving it for something good, something worthy. I slipped it on carefully, smoothing the fabric over my hips. I clasped the pearl necklace my mother had left me before she passed, tiny warm stones resting against my collarbone like her hands. A spray of jasmine perfume, the one I only used for holidays and once-in-a-lifetime moments, drifted through my bedroom. When I looked in the mirror, for the first time in a while, I felt beautiful, elegant, not invisible, not old, just Evelyn Moretti, a woman who'd lived, loved, built a family, and earned her place in every room she entered. And Rosehaven Manor, today's venue, was a room I'd paid handsomely to enter. $120,000, to be exact. Every cent from the savings and investments Angelo, my late husband, had worked his entire life to build. The same money he once told me to use only for something that brings joy to your heart. Luca's wedding felt like that joy. For 6 months, my daughter Marissa and her husband Nolan had settled into my living room on Sunday afternoons, sipping the espresso I made, talking to me in soft, sweet tones they must have practiced in the car beforehand. You know how it is these days, Mom. Marissa would sigh dramatically, crossing her legs with the confidence of a woman who'd never paid a real bill in her life. Weddings are so expensive. Then Nolan would chime in. We just want the best for Luca, the wedding he deserves. I asked them just once how much that dream wedding would cost. A glossy brochure appeared as if by magic, a venue that looked like a palace, a catering menu lined with butter-poached seafood, truffle risotto, and desserts crafted by a pastry chef whose Instagram had 500,000 followers. And the gown? Marissa described it as ethereal couture, which I later discovered meant as expensive as a used car. I didn't hesitate. Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had asked more questions, paid closer attention. Read the fine print not just on the contracts but on the expressions they wore, I might have seen something. A shadow, a calculation, a desire not for my presence, but for my wallet. But I was foolish enough to believe they loved me. When the cab pulled up to Rosehaven Manor that afternoon, I felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly carried me through the doors before my feet touched the ground. The building itself was breathtaking, white stone columns wrapped in vines, candles flickering in lanterns, soft strings of lights sewn into the trees like stars stitched by hand. Guests were arriving in beautiful clothes, laughing, taking pictures. A sea of faces, neighbors, friends, distant relatives, many of whom stopped to compliment the event. Completely unaware that I had orchestrated every detail, I walked toward the grand entrance where Marissa and Nolan stood greeting guests, looking like the perfect power couple. Nolan in a navy-tailored suit, Marissa sparkling in a gold gown that practically screamed, "Look at me, Marissa," I called out, smiling. "Everything looks beautiful, sweetheart." She didn't smile back. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, cold, sharp, unfamiliar, and then she looked over my shoulder as if searching for someone more important. Nolan glanced away, fidgeting with his cufflinks. Before I could speak again, Marissa grabbed the guest list from the receptionist. I thought she was going to welcome me properly. Maybe even say something kind. Instead, she announced loudly enough for the entire entryway to hear. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I froze. I thought she was joking at first. I even laughed. "What am I doing here?" "I'm here for Luca's wedding." "Of course." She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She scanned the guest list. Lips pursed. And then looked up with an expression that could slice open a soul. "You're not on the list." The words didn't land at once. They floated, suspended in the air between us, as if waiting for permission to strike. The chatter behind me went silent. 180 people at least watched my humiliation unfold like a performance they paid to see. She said it again, louder this time, to make sure no one missed it. "You're not on the list. Evelyn." My name. Not Mom. Not Mother. Not even a whisper of affection. I felt a tremor start in my chest. There must be a mistake. I managed. "I reviewed the invitations with you. Every name. It wasn't a mistake." Marissa snapped. And then I saw it. The smirk. That small, upward curl on her mouth, a curl of victory. The kind she used to wear as a child when she got away with something cruel. I looked at Nolan for help. He stared at the marble floor, as if it held every answer he'd ever need. The receptionist shifted awkwardly. The guests behind me parted like I carried disease. I stood there, a 4-year-old woman in a beautiful lavender dress, suddenly feeling ridiculous. Small. Unwanted. My throat burned. My eyes stung. But I swallowed it down. Dignity was the only thing they hadn't taken yet. "Very well," I said softly. "If I'm a mistake, I apologize for the inconvenience." And I turned away. I walked back down the stone path under the floral arch I paid for. Past the musicians I had chosen. Past the guests who refused to meet my eyes. The cab driver was still waiting, thank God. He blinked at me as I approached. Stunned. "Did you forget something?" "Ma'am," he asked gently. I climbed into the back seat. "Yes," I said, staring straight ahead. I forgot what kind of daughter I raised. As we drove away, something cracked open inside me, not weakness, not grief, but the first spark of something fierce. That was the day they erased my name. They thought that would be the end of me. But it was only the beginning. If you've ever had to choose dignity over family, tell me in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, tap like and follow so we can keep walking through these journeys together. When I returned to my house that evening, the sun had already dipped behind the neighboring rooftops, leaving everything soaked in a strange, bruised kind of twilight, the kind of light that made the familiar walls feel foreign, like I'd stepped into someone else's home, a home belonging to a woman who no longer existed. I closed the front door quietly, almost reverently, as though loud sounds might shatter whatever was left of me. The lavender silk dress clung to my skin, suddenly suffocating. My hands trembled as I unfastened the pearls at my neck. The necklace slipped through my fingers and dropped onto the console table with a soft clink that echoed louder than Marissa's voice at the wedding entrance. "You're not on the list." 4 words. 4 tiny, merciless words that buried themselves deep inside me. I walked down the hallway, the silk brushing against my legs like a mockery of elegance. In the bedroom mirror, the dress no longer made me look elegant. It made me look like a woman who had tried too hard. A woman desperate for a place in a celebration she herself paid for. A woman ready to give love to people who handed her humiliation in return. I tore the dress off, letting it fall onto the floor in a wrinkled, defeated heap. The sight of it made something inside me twist painfully. I'd chosen that dress because I believed, foolishly, that Marissa would see me and feel proud. That she would look at me as more than the afterthought she treated me as. That she would, even for one fleeting second, appreciate me. But tonight had proven what I should have understood years ago. I wasn't a mother to her. I was a faucet, a bank account, a last resort safety net when life inconvenienced her. For a long moment, I just stood there, half-dressed, staring at my own reflection. My eyes were swollen. My cheeks were flushed. There was a fragile, fractured woman in the mirror who I recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. Then my gaze drifted to the framed photograph on the wall, Angelo and me, 40 years younger, standing in front of our old logistics warehouse. The one we built from nothing? My hair was swept back by wind, and Angelo's arm was wrapped around me protectively, his grin as wide as the sun. We did everything together. I whispered into the empty room. And now look at me. The loneliness hit so sharply, I had to sit down on the edge of my bed just to keep breathing. If Angelo had been alive, he would have marched into that venue and demanded respect for me. He would have looked Marissa straight in the eye and said, "If you have no room for your mother, you have no room for anything." But instead, it was just me, just Evelyn, a 4-year-old widow who had allowed her daughter to clip her wings one guilt-trimmed feather at a time. And that was when the humiliation crystallized into something else. Something harder. Something that made me stand up. I walked into the small office across the hall, a room I rarely entered since Angelo died. But tonight, the air felt different, purposeful, electric. Inside the drawer of his old mahogany desk was a cream-colored folder labeled Luca's Wedding. I had organized it myself: invoices, contracts, venue agreements, dress fittings, catering receipts, deposit confirmations. Every dollar had my name beside it. Every page had my signature. They had used everything I had to give, but they forgot the most important thing. I keep my proof. I set the folder on the desk and reached for the landline, a device I barely touched since most people text these days. But there was one person who always picked up the phone for me, no matter what time it was. Caraway and Bloom. "This is Benedict." A familiar voice answered. Even hearing it steadied me. "Ben, it's Evelyn." A pause. Then Evelyn. "Are you all right? Today was Luca's big—" I was turned away. I whispered. Silence. Then the rustle of papers. Then the tightening of breath. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, voice low and controlled. I explained everything. The crowd. The humiliation. Marissa's cold eyes. The way she pointed at the guest list like it was a weapon. By the time I finished, my voice was raw, but steady. Ben didn't speak for a long time. Finally, in a tone I had never heard from him in 30 years, he said, "Evelyn, they messed with the wrong woman." His confidence settled into me like warm floodwater filling empty spaces. "I need you tomorrow morning," I said. "I need the best attorney you can be." "You'll have more than that," he promised. "You'll have justice." When I hung up the phone, the house was painfully silent. I returned to the bedroom and looked at the discarded lavender dress. I should have taken it to the dry cleaners, preserved it gently, tucked it away. But it wasn't a symbol of celebration anymore. It was a reminder of a humiliation so sharp it cut through decades of maternal forgiveness. I left it on the floor, left it for the night, left it behind. I didn't cry that night. Not one tear. Maybe I'd cried too many tears for that girl. That woman. That daughter of mine. Over the years, tears wasted on birthdays she forgot. Christmas dinners she canceled last minute. Excuses she made when she needed something. And silence she offered when I needed her. Tonight was different. Tonight, something old inside me cracked open. Not a wound, a rebirth. I walked back into the office and turned on the lamp. The soft golden glow made the folder on the desk look like a blueprint, a strategy, a declaration. My humiliation had awakened someone I thought I'd lost. The woman who built a business from nothing. The woman who negotiated contracts with iron in her voice. The woman who balanced books down to the cent. The woman Angelo trusted more than he trusted himself. I sat down in the leather chair, the folder open in front of me, like a map back to my own power. Tomorrow morning, Marissa and Nolan would wake up in a hotel bed in Florence, eating room service breakfast, believing they'd gotten away with everything. They had no idea that while they sipped cappuccinos in Italy, I was sharpening the legal axe. They had erased me from a guest list, but now I would erase them from the life they'd been living off my generosity. Not out of revenge, but out of overdue necessity. I wasn't the broken woman who left Rosehaven Manor tonight. That version of me had died at the door. The moment my name wasn't on the list, the woman in this chair, reviewing documents by lamplight, breathing deeply, steady, controlled. She was someone else entirely. Someone they should never have underestimated. Ben arrived the next morning at precisely 9:02 a.m., which told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't slept much either. The moment I opened the door and he saw my face, no mascara, no pearls, no lavender dress, just an old woman sitting inside the ruins of her own dignity. His jaw tightened the way it used to when he prepared for trial. "Evelyn," he said, stepping inside without waiting for me to invite him. "Sit. Show me everything." I led him to the dining table, where the cream-colored folder lay open like an autopsy of my own gullibility. He pulled out the contracts, flipping through each one meticulously, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. "This is all in your name?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes," I replied. "Every invoice, every payment, every signature." Ben exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that precedes a storm. "Marissa and Nolan are either unbelievably stupid," he muttered, "or they've started believing their own fantasy that your money belongs to them." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He saw enough in my silence. He continued reading. Catering paid by me. Venue paid by me. Gown paid by me. The event coordinator contract signed by me. Even the security deposit. The floral design. The cocktail bar upgrade, all me. After 10 minutes, he looked up. "Legally, you were the host of that event." I let out a humorless laugh. The host who wasn't allowed inside her own party? Ben leaned back in the chair, folding his hands. "Evelyn, this isn't just humiliation. This is actionable. Emotional distress. Misuse of funds. Possibly even fraud if they intentionally misled you." He said it so matter-of-factly, as though he were discussing the weather. But inside me something trembled. Not fear. Recognition. Because for the first time in years, someone was calling what Marissa did by its real name, not misunderstanding. Not family drama. Not your daughter can be emotional sometimes. No, this was cruelty. Intentional, calculated, public. And I was done forgiving it. "You're not on the list." Those words replayed in my mind like a bruise pressed again and again. Ben flipped through the last page and closed the folder softly, like a priest closing a Bible. "Tell me what you want, Evelyn, and I'll make it happen." What did I want? Yesterday, I might have said an apology. Last year, I might have said love. A decade ago, I might have said understanding. But today, I wanted something else entirely. "I want my life back," I said, "and I want them out of it." Ben nodded once. "Sharp. Then we start with the assets." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out reading glasses, which meant he was about to dig into the real meat of the situation. "Let's list everything Marissa and Nolan are using right now that legally belongs to you." I walked to Angelo's old office and returned with a blue folder I hadn't opened in years. I set it in front of Ben. "These," I said softly, "are the things they think are theirs." Inside were the deed to the townhouse where Marissa and Nolan had lived for 8 years, rent-free, a 3-story property in downtown Providence. The ownership documents for the lakeside villa in Collins Bay, the same villa they called their weekend escape. The SUV Marissa used daily. Technically, part of the old logistics fleet Angelo and I once operated. A second car. A hybrid sedan, Nolan claimed, was company issued. When the company that used to issue cars no longer existed. A monthly $5. 200 transfer, labeled as a family allowance, which Marissa insisted I send to help them get by. Ben thumbed through each sheet. Slower this time. His eyes darkening. Evelyn, this is a fortune. It was never a fortune to them. I replied quietly. Just expected. He pursed his lips. They never paid property taxes. Not once. Maintenance fees. All me. Utilities, insurance, renovations. All me. Ben took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose the way he always did when confronting human absurdity. They've been living like royalty on your dime, he said. And they don't even want you at the table. I nodded. Not even in the room. He placed the glasses beside the blue folder, leaned forward, and asked, "What do you want to do with each item?" The question was a match thrown into dry grass. The townhouse, he prompted. Evict them. Formally. He nodded. 30 days notice. I'll prepare it. The villa. Change the locks. Today. The SUV. Repossess. Immediately. The second car. Send a written demand for return. If they don't comply, report it as unauthorized use of property. Ben smiled, not meanly, not triumphantly, but with the kind of respect that comes from witnessing someone finally stand in her own truth. And the allowance, he asked gently. I walked to my purse and retrieved my phone, not the old flip phone, Marissa mocked, but the newer smartphone I had tried to learn. Only to be told by my daughter that older people should stick to simple things. I opened my banking app, found the scheduled transfer, and pressed cancel. The screen blinked, and it was done. No more, I said. Not after yesterday. Ben nodded approvingly. Good. But something else began to pulse inside me. Something deeper. Something sharper. It wasn't anger. It wasn't vengeance. It was realization. For years, decades, I had allowed myself to shrink so I wouldn't overshadow Marissa's fragile ego. I let her talk down to me, manipulate me, treat me like a fool. I softened myself so she wouldn't feel small next to the woman I used to be. But last night shattered all of that. I had been the architect of my own invisibility. And now I was done building walls that protected people who didn't deserve protection. Ben stood, slipping the folders into his briefcase. I'll draft everything today. You'll have copies by this evening. He paused near the doorway. Are you going to be all right? I looked up at him. The morning light catching the edges of the room, turning everything golden. I will be, I said. And for the first time since Angelo died, I meant it. Ben left just before noon. And the moment the door clicked shut behind him, the house fell into a silence so complete it felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, everything still, everything suspended, while something enormous and unstoppable churned just beyond the walls. I stood there for a moment with my hand still resting on the doorknob, breathing slowly, letting the weight of what I had just set in motion settle into my bones. Yesterday, I was humiliated at the entrance of Rosehaven Manor. Today, I had drawn the blueprint to dismantle the entire kingdom Marissa and Nolan had built on top of my generosity. And yet, despite all of it, I didn't feel cruel, only awake. I walked back to the dining room, where the cream-colored wedding folder still lay open. I closed it gently and slid it into the drawer of the cabinet, not to hide it, but to mark the moment. It was no longer a wound. It was a weapon. And the war had already begun. But first, I needed to reclaim something else entirely myself. I went to the bedroom, where the lavender silk dress lay on the floor like the ghost of a woman I no longer was. I stared at it for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the house, the tick of the grandfather clock downstairs, the distant murmur of cars passing outside. Once, I would have picked up the dress carefully, smoothed it out, hung it properly. I would have felt guilty for letting something so delicate touch the ground. But today, I knelt, gathered the fabric in my hands, and tore. The sound was shockingly loud, an ugly, ripping tear that split the silence down the middle. The silk surrendered instantly, unraveling like the illusion it had represented. I tore it again, and again, each rip a release, each strip a discarded expectation. The woman who wore it had walked into a celebration she built and been told she didn't belong. That version of me had died last night, when I stood up, surrounded by ribbons of lavender. Something inside me felt startlingly clean. I threw the pieces into a trash bag, tied it shut, and carried it directly outside to the bin. The winter air was cold against my face, biting and invigorating. I inhaled deeply. Good riddance. Inside again. I moved through the house room by room, picking up things I had kept out of habit or guilt. The framed Christmas photo with Marissa's family in the drawer, the birthday card she'd signed without a message trash, the throw pillows she insisted I buy because everyone on social media uses these donated, the overpriced vase she'd claimed would elevate my aesthetic boxed up. My home felt lighter with every object I let go. In the guest room, the one Marissa and Nolan proudly called their room, I stripped the bedding, pulling the expensive sheets off the mattress. I bundled them up and tossed them into the hall like laundry from a stranger's house. I opened the closet where Marissa had left a row of her dresses, just in case she felt like staying over. I packed every one of them into a bag. This space wasn't theirs anymore. It never should have been. It was mine. All of it was mine, and I was finally reclaiming it. When the house was cleared, I returned to Angelo's old office. His chair still held the faint smell of cedar and cologne. His desk drawers still slid open with a whisper, as if waiting patiently for me to come back to myself. In the top drawer, under old business cards and a tin of paper clips, was a small black notebook. Angelo's handwriting filled the inside neat, slightly slanted. The handwriting of a man who built a life with intention. On the last page, written in faint ink, was something I had forgotten. If life ever backs you into a corner, Evie, remember who built the floor you're standing on? I pressed my fingers to the words, for the first time since the wedding. My eyes stung not from pain, but from recognition. I had backed myself into a corner for years, but I had built the floor beneath it. And that meant I could walk out. The next task was the most important: securing what was mine. I sat down with my laptop, a device I had bought months ago but barely touched because Marissa always said, "Just let me do it." "Mom, you'll get confused." I stared at the blank screen. My hands hovered uncertainly above the keys. Then I opened the browser, slowly, awkwardly, but with determination. I navigated to my banking institution. I had only ever logged in twice, years ago, and yet, as the dashboard loaded, I felt a flicker of something surprising. Curiosity, confidence, capability. My accounts were their investment portfolios, savings accounts, trusts I had forgotten I opened in my 60 seconds. And then I saw it. The old account. The one Marissa knew about. The one she used to help me manage bills. With a steady hand, I moved every dollar except $1. $200 into a new high-security trust account. One with multi-step verification. One only I controlled. The old account glowed pitifully on the screen. Empty. Insignificant. Useless to anyone who expected it to flow endlessly. I closed the laptop and exhaled a shaky breath. So this is what taking your life back feels like. Around 2 p.m. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of a young tech tutor I'd once hired briefly when trying to learn to use Zoom. His name was Jonah. "Evelyn, long time." He answered cheerfully. "Everything okay? I need lessons," I said plainly. "Real ones." A pause. Of course, when? Today? And every day this week? He laughed gently. Sure, I can do that. When we hung up, I sat back in Angelo's chair, feeling something unfamiliar tightening in my chest. Not anger, not grief, not fear. Momentum. I was moving toward myself again, after years of shrinking, dimming, quieting so I wouldn't upset Marissa or appear too much. I was expanding again. Jonah arrived at 4. He walked into the office, took one look at the wedding folder and the torn dress bag by the door, and said softly, "So, we're rebuilding." Huh. I nodded, completely. Jonah and I sat together for 2 hours. He taught me how to use spreadsheets, budgeting apps, file encryption, secure email, password managers. He explained each step with patience and without a trace of condescension. "Don't let anyone tell you you're too old for this," he said, as he helped me create a secure digital vault. My mom used to say, "Age only limits the people who let it." She was a smart woman, I said. She was. He answered softly. A shadow crossed his face, a brief flicker of grief he tried to hide. His mother had passed 3 years earlier from ovarian cancer. I remembered attending the memorial, bringing lasagna and fruit tart because I didn't know what else to bring. Jonah had hugged me then, one of those genuine, aching hugs you give someone who reminds you of something you lost. He had always been kind to me. By the time he left, my mind was buzzing, not overwhelmed, but alive. The fragile widow people thought I was gone. I could feel my old self, the strategist, the negotiator, the woman Angelo admired, stirring, stretching, stepping back into the world. And as I locked the door behind Jonah, I knew with absolute clarity, Marissa and Nolan had no idea who they'd tried to erase, but they were about to find out. Jonah left that evening just as the sky faded into a muted watercolor of purples and blues. I watched his car disappear down the street before closing the door and taking a deep breath, one that went so far down into my lungs, it felt like it reached a part of me I hadn't accessed in years. The house was darker now, quieter, but not in the oppressive way it felt the night before. This silence felt different, intentional, like a clean slate waiting to be filled. The fragility of humiliation had evaporated, replaced by something sharper, steadier, purpose. Upstairs, the torn lavender dress sat in the trash bin outside. I didn't regret a single rip. I walked to the kitchen to make tea. Chamomile with honey, a little ritual that used to comfort me after long days. As the kettle warmed, my eyes drifted to the phone on the counter. It had remained quiet all day. Too quiet. Marissa should have contacted me by now. But she was in Florence with Nolan, wandering cobblestone streets, sipping wine, likely believing she'd pulled off the perfect coup: erase your mother from the guest list, pocket her money, leave her humiliated, and then enjoy a luxury honeymoon courtesy of her bank account. Except today was the first of the month, and the allowance didn't go through. Part of me wondered how long it would take before the silence cracked. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. "Mom, did something happen? Our payment didn't come. Please tell me you're okay." I stared at the message for a long moment. Not once did she mention the wedding. Not once did she ask if I had gotten home safely after being publicly humiliated. Not once did she acknowledge cruelty. Just the money. Always the money. I didn't reply. The kettle whistled sharply and I poured myself a cup of tea. I carried it to the living room and settled into my armchair, the one that fit the shape of my body. The one I'd sat in every morning for 15 years. The second text came quickly. "Mom, it still hasn't gone through. Is your bank having issues?" My thumb hovered over the screen. Not because I wanted to respond, but because this was the moment everything began unraveling for them. I know my daughter well. She would be pacing the hotel suite, hair perfectly curled for an Instagram selfie she'd take later. Nolan checking his phone every 2 minutes and pretending he wasn't panicking. They were so predictable. After 8 minutes of silence from me, the third message arrived. Mom. Please answer. We're worried. Worried about money, not about me. I deleted all 3 messages. My hands didn't shake, not even a little. The following morning, I woke up before the sun. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, Angelo's favorite, and sat at the dining table watching the sky change from soft gray to gold. The house felt peaceful, clear, ordered. Mine. Around 9 a.m. Ben called. The villa locks have been changed. He said matter-of-factly. Security is in place. Cameras too. Thank you. I replied, and the repossession agency reached out. They'll recover the SUV from Marissa's garage this week. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. And the eviction notice has been filed with the court. He continued. The bailiff will post it on the townhouse door within 72 hours. Good. I said. All of it. Ben paused, his voice softening. How are you holding up? I looked around my kitchen, the lemon-yellow walls Angelo once painted. The tiny ceramic rooster I bought at an open-air market in Sicily. The steam rising from my coffee mug. I feel lighter, I said, and heavier, both at once. That's called reclaiming your power. Ben replied. It never comes without weight. He was right. Power always demands something in return. 3 days passed. Quietly, calmly, precisely. While Marissa and Nolan posted photos from Florence, their cappuccinos, their gondola rides in Venice, their matching leather jackets, I continued building a world they no longer belonged to. I attended my digital literacy class. I learned how to organize spreadsheets, how to track my investments, how to create encrypted folders. I even learned how to reset a router on my own, a small victory, but a satisfying one. Every morning, I took a walk around the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp, late winter air. The cold always helped me think. I didn't respond to Marissa's messages, not one, but I watched as they shifted from concern to irritation to veiled panic. Mom. The card didn't work again. Is something wrong? Can you send the funds manually? Mom, why aren't you answering? Then, the one message that revealed everything. We need the money. This is serious. We. Not you. Not are you okay. Not we're sorry about what happened. Just we need the money. I deleted it like the rest. Later that afternoon, while I was at my computer class, I imagined what was happening in Florence. Marissa staring down at her phone, jaw clenched, Nolan checking their joint account again and again, as if refreshing the screen would magically refill the funds. The first crack in their perfect vacation, the first consequence of my silence. I didn't revel in their panic, but I did feel justified. For years, every time they needed money, they'd called me faster than they ever called for birthdays, holidays, or Mother's Day. They had turned me into an engine that ran their lives, and now the engine had finally shut off. On the 5th day, Ben called again. Townhouse eviction notice has been posted, he said, right on the door. Good. And the repossession agency found the SUV. It'll be retrieved this week. Good. And this might interest you. His voice had a hint of amusement. A local reporter reached out to the federal property office, asking about the villa. Apparently Marissa posted videos claiming it was their family summer home, and some viewers questioned the ownership. My eyebrows lifted. Oh, I said. I forwarded the reporter the public deed record with your name on it. I thought you deserved the credit. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A real laugh. Bright. Unexpected. Free. Oh. Ben. I said. You shouldn't have. Oh. Evelyn. He replied. I absolutely should have. That night, right before I went to bed, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Marissa. It was Nolan. Evelyn. What is going on? Why haven't you sent the allowance? We're having financial issues here. We're relying on you. Please respond. I stared at the message. Reliance. When did I sign up for that? When did I agree to become their permanent lifeline, their safety net, their silent benefactor? When did my retirement become their lifestyle? I turned off the phone without replying. I slept soundly. On the 7th day, they finally broke. At 6:42 a.m., my phone rang, an international number. I let it ring. It rang again. And again. On the 5th attempt, I answered. A shaky breath, a congested voice. Marissa. Mom. I waited. Mom. The bank declined the hotel payment. A pause. We can't cover the bill. They said the card has insufficient funds. I said nothing. We need help, she whispered. Need. The word that had governed my life for 20 years. Not love. Not respect. Not gratitude. Need. Finally, I spoke. Maybe you should ask the guest list for help, I said. The silence that followed was cold and sharp. Mom, that's not fair. Neither was erasing me, I replied. She inhaled sharply. Then, you're being dramatic, she snapped. This isn't the time to punish us. We're stranded. No, I interrupted. You're not stranded. You're just finally living within your means. Then I hung up. After that, I unplugged the phone entirely. And in the quiet that followed, I realized their panic was only the beginning. My awakening was already well underway. The morning after that final call from Florence, the world felt crisp and sharpened, as though someone had lifted a thin film off my eyes. The sunlight spilled through my kitchen window in clear golden sheets. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up with heaviness in my chest. Instead, I felt something startlingly unfamiliar. Clarity. I brewed my coffee slowly, letting the scent fill the kitchen, letting the quiet settle into the corners of my home. Outside, the neighborhood children shouted as they walked to school. A jogger passed by with his dog tugging on the leash. Life continued, ordinary and undisturbed. But for me, everything had changed. Their panic in Florence wasn't the climax, it was the prelude, the overture, a small taste of what life felt like without using me as a crutch. They had no idea how many more falling dominoes were lined up waiting for them. I took my coffee to the living room and sat in the armchair, the steam rising in soft curls. On the table beside me were the printed copies Ben had sent over, a neat stack of legal documents, each one a step toward reclaiming what had been taken. I didn't touch them yet. I didn't need to. Instead, I let myself sit in the calmness of my own home, savoring the quiet, this new quiet. The kind not filled with guilt, obligation, or anxiety. Just peace. At exactly 11:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. I expected Jonah. Or maybe the packages I'd ordered for my new courses. I didn't expect Ben. He stood on the porch with an expression so serious that for a moment, my heart kicked painfully in my chest. Ben, is everything all right? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Evelyn, something happened. I gestured toward the living room, pulse quickening. What is it? He set his briefcase down and pulled out a slim envelope, the kind official notices came in. The repossession agency tried to recover the SUV from the townhouse garage, he said. Yes, they couldn't. Why? I asked, frowning. They couldn't find it. I blinked. What do you mean they couldn't find it? Ben gave me a look I hadn't seen before, a blended expression of exasperation and disbelief. Marissa and Nolan took it with them to Florence, he said slowly. They shipped it overseas 2 months ago for their honeymoon, claiming they needed a vehicle for long-term content creation. And quarters. I stared at him. Then I laughed. I actually laughed. The kind of laugh you let out when the absurdity of the world becomes too spectacular to ignore. They shipped the SUV, I repeated, struggling to get the words out. To Italy. Yes, Ben said grimly. Without permission. Without notice. Without legal right. I shook my head. That car isn't even registered in their name. No. But they shipped it under Nolan's agency license. Fraudulent. Illegal. Reckless. My laughter faded, replaced by something heavier, a realization. Settling into place like the final piece of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. They hadn't just humiliated me. They hadn't just used me. They hadn't just exploited my kindness. They had come to believe my property was theirs by entitlement, not gratitude. Ben, I said quietly, we need to file a police report. He nodded. I already drafted it. Of course he had. He placed the document in front of me. And as my eyes skimmed the words, unauthorized international transport of property, intent to defraud, misuse of asset, criminal liability, I felt something warm and steady rise inside me. Justice. Not revenge. Not vindictiveness. Justice. I signed my name at the bottom. Evelyn A. Moretti. A name they tried to erase. A name that had returned sharper than ever. But the consequences didn't end there. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, my email pinged with a forwarded message from Ben. The bailiff had posted the eviction notice on the townhouse door. Clear. Legible. Undeniable. 30 days to vacate. Failure to comply would result in forcible removal. I pictured Marissa and Nolan standing in the airport when they returned jet-lagged. Disheveled. Exhausted only to be met by a notice on the front door of the home they had been calling theirs for years. A home they never paid a single cent toward. A home I had provided in the belief that family should take care of family. My phone buzzed. Another international call. I didn't answer. It rang again. Still, I let it ring. On the third attempt, I picked up. Nolan this time. His voice was shaky. Frantic. Evelyn. What the hell is this? We just got a message from the building manager about some notice on our door. I didn't say anything. What did you do? He demanded. Why is there an eviction notice? Tell me this is a mistake. Evelyn. I took a slow sip of my coffee. No mistake. I replied calmly. You have 30 days. 30 days, he shouted. You can't throw your own daughter out of her home. It was never her home. I said evenly. It was mine. Everything you've used for the last 8 years has been mine. Paid for by me. Maintained by me. And taken for granted by both of you. You can't do this. He snapped. You're being unreasonable. You're being vindictive. No. I said, I'm being awake. Evelyn. Listen to me. Please. This is insane. You're right. I cut in softly. It is insane. It's insane that I let you and Marissa treat me like a utility. It's insane that I believed love would change the way you saw me. It's insane that I thought gratitude was something you were capable of. He went silent. For years, I continued. I've been your invisible paycheck. Your silent provider. Your backup plan. You erased my name from your son's wedding because you didn't need me to be there. But you still wanted my money. That ends now. The silence stretched into something cold and rigid. Then, you'll regret this, Nolan whispered. We'll take you to court. We'll prove you're not mentally fit to handle your finances. We'll get a conservatorship. I laughed. The kind of laugh that carried no fear at all. Try. I said, I dare you. He sputtered. Blindsided. I underwent a psychological evaluation last week at my own request. I continued. The report confirms I am fully competent. The court will see right through you. He cursed under his breath. Goodbye. Nolan, I said. Enjoy the rest of your honeymoon. I hung up. And then, for the first time that day, I smiled, not out of spite, but out of a profound, bone-deep satisfaction. For decades, I allowed them to dictate how much of myself I was permitted to keep. Not anymore. The balance had shifted. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would shift it back. Their flight landed on a Thursday evening. I knew this not because Marissa told me she hadn't communicated anything other than a handful of increasingly frantic, self-centered messages, but because I checked the airline's arrival schedule myself. Information is power, and I was done being the only one in the dark. They would reach the townhouse around 8:30 p.m. Assuming there were no delays at customs or baggage claim. I could almost picture them rolling suitcases. Sunburned from Florence. Irritated from cramped seats. Expecting to waltz back into the comfortable life they had taken for granted. Except the comfort was gone. I didn't go to the townhouse to witness what happened next. I didn't need to. My neighbor across from the property, a retired teacher named Lillian, phoned me at 9:10 p.m., her voice quivering with a mixture of disbelief, concern, and, if she were being honest, a hint of vindicated satisfaction. "Evelyn," she whispered, "they're home." I sipped my chamomile tea, and they found the notice. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. This wasn't joy. It wasn't cruelty. It was closure, a kind of quiet, necessary shift in the earth beneath all our feet. "What did they do?" I asked. "Oh, Evelyn," Lillian breathed. Marissa screamed so loudly you'd think someone had stabbed her. She kept yelling about betrayal and disrespect, and then she broke down and sobbed on the doorstep. Nolan kept pacing, swearing under his breath, waving the paper in the air like a madman. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, not out of morbid curiosity, but because the scene mattered. It symbolized a breaking point, a long overdue confrontation with reality. And then I murmured, "Oh, you'll like this," she whispered conspiratorially. When Nolan tried to unlock the garage to get the SUV, the one they brag about on social media, the building manager stopped him, said it wasn't authorized to leave the property and was under legal hold. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Lillian kept going. Aghast. "Evelyn." He threw a tantrum. Like a toddler. He shouted at the poor man. Waved his arms. Accused him of overstepping. Marissa stood there sobbing, saying, "This is all her fault, and I couldn't tell if she meant you or the manager." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't the manager's fault. Of course it wasn't. But Evelyn, I've known you 30 years. I've watched you bend and bend and bend for that girl. Someone should have told you long ago you deserved better than being treated like a bank. Her voice softened further. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you." Those simple words landed in a place inside me I didn't realize was still fragile. Proud. Someone was proud of me. Not for enduring. Not for giving. Not for shrinking myself to accommodate others. But for standing up. "Thank you, Lillian," I whispered. "That means more than you know." We hung up shortly thereafter, and I sat in the dark living room, the tea cooling beside me, my hands folded gently in my lap. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled, as though the universe had finally clicked into place. One long, out-of-balance piece, snapping neatly into alignment. The next morning, I woke to find 37 text messages waiting on my phone. From Marissa, "Mom, please call me. This isn't right. You can't do this to us. We came home to shame. Do you understand that people saw? Neighbors saw. Luca's friends saw. Do you want people talking about us? And then, you always pick the worst possible time to act insane." There it was. The truth beneath her panic. Marissa didn't regret what she had done to me. She regretted being embarrassed. Then Nolan chimed in. "This eviction is illegal. You can't just kick out your own family. We've lived there for years. Evelyn, we have rights. You're overreacting. Be reasonable. They always learned the wrong lesson. Not we hurt you. Not we humiliated you. Not we are sorry. Just fix it. Because that was the role they expected me to play. The woman who fixes what they break. The woman who absorbs the damage. Not anymore. I ignored every message. At 1117 a.m. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed the familiar number of the townhouse building manager. Mr. Hartley. Mrs. Moretti, he said the moment I picked up. I thought you should know your daughter and her husband tried to take the sedan out of the garage. The damage. Not anymore. I ignored every message. At 1117 a.m. My phone rang. The caller ID displayed the familiar number of the townhouse building manager. Mr. Hartley. Mrs. Moretti, he said the moment I picked up. I thought you should know your daughter and her husband tried to take the sedan out of the garage this morning. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. I assume you followed the protocol, I asked. Yes, ma'am, he replied. I informed them that the vehicle is listed under repossession and that moving it without authorization would result in police involvement. Well, I'll be honest. They caused a scene. How bad? Bad, he said. Nolan shouted that he'd sue me. Marissa cried and said you were mentally unwell and being manipulated. I smiled softly. Thank you for your professionalism. Mr. Hartley. Always. Ma'am. And, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Another person telling me they saw me. Another person recognizing my value not for what I could provide, but for who I was. It felt surreal. It felt overdue. It felt like healing. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Ben. Call me. You're going to want to hear this. I dialed immediately. He didn't bother with greetings. Evelyn, he began. Your daughter just tried to file a temporary injunction against you, claiming you are mentally incompetent and acting erratically. I laughed. A deep, incredulous, weary laugh. Of course she did. And the judge, I asked. Oh. He denied it outright. Ben said. Didn't even schedule a hearing. He reviewed your medical evaluation report, the one you voluntarily underwent, and said there was no evidence of cognitive impairment whatsoever. I leaned back into my chair, smiling faintly. Ben continued. Voice warm now. He also added a note, unofficially, that if they continue pushing this narrative, they could face sanctions for abuse of process. Well, I said lightly, they never were very good at thinking ahead. No, Ben said with a chuckle. But you are. We talked another 10 minutes updates. Logistics. Timelines before hanging up. By then, the sky outside had softened into a warm peach glow. I stood at the window, watching the early evening light spread across the street like a gentle blessing. Not once did guilt prick at me. Not once did doubt whisper in my ear. Not once did the old version of me, the one who bent to avoid confrontation, try to rise. Instead, all I felt was this. I had survived humiliation. I had reclaimed my power. And now, I was watching them meet the consequences of choices they thought I would never challenge. This wasn't the end. Not even close. But it was the moment I understood deeply. Fully. Irrevocably, that I had finally stopped being afraid of my own strength. 2 days after their return, I stepped out of my building to pick up a parcel, a set of Italian-language textbooks Jonah had recommended when I saw them. Marissa and Nolan, standing right there on the sidewalk, waiting for me. The moment my front door closed behind me, Marissa rushed forward so quickly the heel of her shoe wobbled on the pavement. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her designer blouse wrinkled. Her makeup smudged beneath her eyes. She looked nothing like the polished daughter I once raised. The one who obsessed over appearances more than authenticity. This version of her looked raw, disheveled, cornered. Nolan, beside her, looked even worse, flushed with tension, his jaw clenching and unclenching like he was practicing threats under his breath. "Mom," Marissa cried, voice cracking, "we need to talk." I didn't stop walking. I simply said, "Move." Calm, firm, cold. She stepped in front of me instead, blocking my path. "Mom, please. This has gone too far." "No," I said. "It hasn't gone far enough." Nolan stepped forward now, puffing his chest, trying to reclaim dominance. "You've humiliated us," he snapped. "In front of our neighbors, our friends. You've made us look like criminals." "Interesting," I said evenly. "I was humiliated in front of 180 people, including our entire extended family. And you didn't seem concerned about that." Marissa's face crumpled. "That was a misunderstanding." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't lie to my face." She flinched, because she knew. We all knew. Her silence at the wedding had been intentional. The smirk I saw, intentional. Erasing my name, intentional. Nolan glanced around at the passing pedestrians, clearly uncomfortable being confronted in public. "Can we just go inside, talk like a family? This conversation isn't going inside my home," I said. "And you aren't entering my building. You lost that right." Nolan's nostrils flared. "You can't exclude us." "I already did," I said. "Just like you excluded me from Luca's wedding. Only difference is, I'm doing it legally." Marissa reached out suddenly, fingers grasping at my arm, and I pulled back, causing her to stumble slightly. "Mom," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. We were stressed. Weddings are overwhelming. I wasn't thinking clearly. Nolan wasn't either. The guest list thing was an accident. I laughed. A small, bitter sound. The sound of someone who has nothing left to lose. "It was no accident," I said. "You checked the list yourself. You looked me in the eye and said I wasn't welcome. Not a mistake. A choice." Her tears spilled. "You're twisting things." I stepped closer, letting my voice soften, but only so the blade underneath it could land sharper. "Marissa, I raised you. I know every expression on your face. I recognize the way your mouth twists when you're pleased with yourself. I saw it that day. That wasn't fear or stress." I paused. "That was triumph." She opened her mouth to argue, but found nothing to defend herself with. Nolan shoved his hands into his pockets and leaned toward me. "Let's cut the theatrics. We need the money. We need our home. We need the car for work." "No," I said, lifting my chin. "You want them, not need." "You're our mother-in-law," he barked. "You're supposed to help us." "No," I said again, with a firmness that stopped them both. "I'm not supposed to help anyone. I choose who I help, and I don't choose you." A dark, ugly expression passed over Nolan's face. Resentment. Indignation. "Entitlement. We can take you to court," he said. "We can get a judge to force you into a conservatorship. You're acting unstable." "Oh, Nolan," I said sympathetically. "You're so predictable." His face reddened. "You think I didn't see this coming," I continued. "Last week, I had a court-certified cognitive evaluation done. 8 pages confirming I am entirely competent. The judge will laugh in your faces." Nolan swallowed hard. "Besides," I added, "lawyers cost money, and you have none." Marissa let out a small sob. "Mom, please. We're going to lose everything." "You already did," I replied. "Please," she said again, voice cracking. "We're your family." I tilted my head slightly. "Are you?" I asked. "When I was standing at Luca's wedding, being publicly cast out, who stood with me?" She stared at the ground. "Who comforted me? who defended me, who asked if I was okay, who called the next day. Silence. Cold. Hollow. Telling. You didn't lose your home, I said gently. You lost your access. To me, to my money, to my generosity. You lost the version of me who tolerated your disrespect. Nolan stepped closer again, heat rising off him like he was a man collapsing under his own anger. You're making a mistake, he hissed. We'll fight this. Fight all you want. I said, you'll lose. Not because the law is on my side, though it is. You'll lose because you lack character, integrity, gratitude. Marissa let out a small, keening sound that barely sounded human. I felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Only release. Nolan grabbed Marissa's hand. Let's go, he muttered. She's not worth it. I smiled. There it is again, I said softly. The real you. He stiffened. You never saw me as a mother, I said. Just an ATM. I turned to walk away, but paused halfway toward the building door. For what it's worth, I added, looking back at them. You didn't break me at the wedding. You freed me. Freed me to see the truth. Freed me to take my life back. Marissa's face twisted in anguish. Nolan scowled like a man who had lost control of the world in his palms. And then, the final blow. You erased my name from a guest list, I said. So I erased your names from my life. I opened the building door, looked them both in the eyes. Good luck. The door closed softly behind me. Not slammed. Not locked in anger. Closed in certainty. The kind of certainty that comes when you finally stop begging for love from people determined not to give it. I didn't cry as the door closed behind me. Not a single tear. Instead, I leaned my back against the marble wall of the lobby and inhaled slowly deep into my ribs. Deep into the part of me that had forgotten how to breathe without permission. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't wounded. I wasn't afraid. I was free. But freedom, it has an echo. And that echo arrived exactly 12 minutes later. I had just set my textbooks on the kitchen counter when my phone rang, a number I recognized immediately. Not Marissa. Not Nolan. Luca, my grandson. The child I once held against my chest while he napped. His tiny fingers gripping the sleeve of my sweater. The child I read bedtime stories to. The boy who used to climb into my lap after school and tell me everything. Even the things he hid from his parents. But that boy was gone. The man he had become, I wasn't sure I knew him anymore. Still, I answered, Grandma! His voice cracked on the second syllable. A tremble fear. Perhaps, or shame hid beneath it. Hello. Luca. Grandma. What's happening? He asked. Breathless. Mom and Dad, they're saying you lost your mind. I smiled faintly. Of course they were. It was the only narrative that allowed them to remain victims. I'm perfectly sane, I said calmly. A shaky inhale. Grandma, he continued. They said you kicked them out of their home. They said you're hurting them, that you're being manipulated, that you're unstable. Manipulated, unstable. The words people use when they want to make a strong woman look weak. My dear, I said softly. I did what I had to do. There was a long silence. So long I thought the call had dropped. And then, Grandma, why? Why? The single word burned like a brand. Why wasn't he asking why his parents publicly humiliated me? Why wasn't he asking why they erased my name? Why wasn't he asking whether I had been hurt? Whether I had eaten dinner that night? Whether I made it home safely after being cast out like a stray dog? Why wasn't he asking anything that mattered? I swallowed. Steeling myself. Luca, I said gently. Were you told I wasn't invited to your wedding? Another silence. A heavier one. Grandma. I didn't see there was so much happening I don't know. You saw the empty chair. I interrupted. The one meant for me. He said nothing. You saw that I wasn't there, I continued. And you never asked why. A long exhale. The sound of someone realizing their silence had consequences. That's not fair, he whispered. I didn't know what Mom was doing. Then you should have asked, I said. Another pause. But, Grandma, his voice frayed. Did you really have to evict them, to cut the money, to take everything? I let my eyes drift to the window. A soft breeze rustled the curtains. The morning light spilled across the floor. Yes, I said simply. But why we're family? Family. The word tasted different coming from him. Not like manipulation, more like confusion. Hurt. Innocence. But innocence does not erase complicity. Luca, I said quietly. I was turned away from your wedding in front of nearly 200 people. Your mother looked at me like a stranger. Your father looked embarrassed to know me. And you, I paused. You didn't look for me. The silence stretched taut. I didn't know, he said helplessly. I swear I didn't know. Mom told me you weren't feeling well, she said. You decided not to come. There it was. The lie. The convenient rewrite. Luca, I said gently. Sweetheart. Listen to me. I sat down slowly. The weight of truth settling between us like a worn but necessary blanket. I raised your mother. I know how she lies. And I know how she manipulates. But you're a grown man. You could have asked. You should have asked. His breath hitched. A small, wounded sound. Grandma, he whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said, but you did. A long pause. Then he said the words I had been waiting for. I'm sorry. The first genuine apology from anyone. I closed my eyes, letting it land, letting it matter. But an apology is not a bridge when it arrives only after the house is on fire. Grandma, he said quietly. Are you okay? I opened my eyes. The question simple. Honest? Overdue broke something open. It was the first time anyone had asked since the wedding. Yes, I replied softly. I am now. What happens next? He asked. That depends on your parents, I answered. And their choices? And on me. A tremor in his voice. Soft. Hopeful. Yes, I said. On you, too. Another silence followed, one not of avoidance, but of dawning comprehension. Finally, I didn't realize how bad things were. They were, I said. But they don't have to stay that way. Not for you. I heard him inhale sharply. He was crying, trying not to let me hear. Failing. I miss you, he whispered. My throat tightened. I miss you too. Luca. The distance between us didn't evaporate. It couldn't not yet. But the call ended not with anger, but with something else. Possibility. When I hung up, I remained seated for a long time, letting the quiet return, letting my heart steady again. Marissa and Nolan were drowning in consequences. But Luca was still reachable, still salvageable, still mine. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not sorrow, not rage, not pride. Hope. The morning after Luca's call, I woke with a strange clarity, like someone had wiped the fog from a mirror and revealed the face I'd forgotten I had. I moved through the house with a purpose that didn't feel forced or fragile. It felt reclaimed. I brewed coffee the way Angelo liked it, strong enough to wake the dead. He used to joke. The aroma filled the kitchen, rising like incense, wrapping itself around me with an old tenderness I thought grief had permanently erased. But today, grief didn't weigh on me. Today, grief had stepped aside for something else entirely. Reinvention. I sat down at the dining table with my laptop, my new laptop. The one Jonah had insisted, had enough processing power to run a small country, and clicked open my spreadsheet software. Rows, columns, cells, symbols of order, symbols of control, symbols of a mind waking back up. I typed numbers confidently, now realizing how ridiculous it had been to let Marissa convince me that I wasn't capable of using a computer. I had run a logistics operation for 15 years, balanced accounts, negotiated contracts, managed freight schedules down to the minute. I could handle a spreadsheet, as the pages filled with organized tabs, properties, legal, investments, animal sanctuary plans. I felt something rearrange inside me. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was upgrading it. By noon, I had a list of tasks ready. Not revenge tasks. Not retaliation lists. Just life. My life. Untethered from Marissa and Nolan. I grabbed my coat and headed outside. The wind bit at my cheeks, but instead of shrinking from it, I welcomed the sting. It made me feel alive. Present. A woman with places to go. My first stop was the local salon, a place I had avoided for over a year. Marissa always insisted on taking me to high-end places she favored, where stylists spoke in hushed tones and looked at me like I was a charity case. Today, I walked into a small, locally owned parlor a few blocks from my house. A cheerful chime announced my entrance. A young woman in a sunflower yellow apron smiled warmly. "Good afternoon. What can I do for you?" I lifted my chin. "I want something new." Her smile widened. "How new?" "Cut it," I said. "Short, sophisticated, strong." She nodded, as if she understood more than my words. "Take a seat." 40 minutes later, I stared at the mirror. Stunned. My hair, light brown with warm undertones, was styled in a modern, layered bob that framed my face and carved 10 years from my age. But it wasn't the hair that shocked me. It was the woman in the reflection. She looked alive, awake, intelligent, powerful. A woman who had stopped begging to be included in rooms and started building her own instead. "You look beautiful," the stylist said softly. "No," I replied, lips curving into a slow smile. "I look like myself." From the salon, I headed to the small mall on Broad Street, not with the mindset of someone buying gifts for others, but for myself. I purchased a new leather handbag that felt durable and timeless, a pair of comfortable walking shoes, a warm wool coat in emerald green, a color Marissa always said wasn't age-appropriate. I bought it anyway. It looked magnificent. As I paid, the clerk, a girl barely in her 20s, said, "Ma'am, you look radiant." Radiant. Not invisible. Not fragile. Not elderly. Radiant. I left the store feeling lighter than I had in years. My final stop that day was something I'd been putting off for too long: the property office. The townhouse Marissa and Nolan had been living in rent-free for 8 years was listed on the market before sunset. Ben had recommended a realtor named Patricia, someone with a sharp eye, a sharper tongue, and a reputation for negotiating like a chess grandmaster. She showed up with a tablet and a smile full of steel. "Mrs. Moretti," she said, shaking my hand. "I hear you're finally letting go of some dead weight." I couldn't help but smile. "That's one way to put it." "We'll get a good price," she assured me. "This property was undervalued for years. I'm not sure why you didn't sell earlier." "Because people I love lived there," I said softly. Patricia nodded with an understanding only women of a certain age possess. "Well," she said, tapping the tablet, "we'll turn that history into something that benefits you now." It was listed within 2 hours. When I returned home, the sky had dipped into shades of rose and gray. Evening had arrived quietly, the way it always does when you're paying attention. I hung my new coat by the door and placed my handbag on the counter. The house smelled faintly of jasmine from the perfume I'd worn to the salon. Then I went into Angelo's old office, my office now, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in years. Moretti Haven Animal Sanctuary Proposal. Angelo and I had dreamed of creating a shelter for abandoned animals, dogs, cats, the occasional parrot or rabbit. Something humble. Something good. But life had swept us along with obligations and mortgages and Marissa's endless needs. I opened the folder. Smoothing out the old sketches, Angelo drew a fenced meadow. A pond. The small cottage where volunteers would work. I felt my throat tighten. But not with sorrow. With longing. With possibility. With a sense of coming full circle. I reached for my laptop, opened a new document, typed, Project Revival, Moretti Haven for Animals. I spent the next 3 hours researching zoning regulations, land availability, construction companies, and volunteer networks. This wasn't a whim. This was a calling I had silenced. Until now. At 8 p.m. Jonah arrived for my next digital literacy session. I opened the door with my new haircut and emerald coat still on. His eyes widened. "Whoa, Mrs. Moretti, you look incredible." I laughed. "Thank you, Jonah." He stepped inside, carrying 2 lattes. "I brought coffee. You deserve it." We sat at the kitchen table, and he taught me how to organize digital folders, automate bill payments, and set up spreadsheets for managing project budgets. "You're a natural," he said. "No," I said. "I'm simply remembering." When the lesson ended, Jonah hesitated at the door. "You know," he said softly, "I think your sanctuary project is beautiful." My breath hitched. He shouldn't have known. I hadn't mentioned it aloud. The folder was still on the desk in the office. He must have seen it by accident. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled warmly. "You're rebuilding something. Not from broken pieces, but from strong ones." After he left, I stood at the window, watching snowfall drift softly through the streetlights. My home no longer felt like a waiting room for someone else's needs. It felt like possibility. And as I turned away from the window, I realized something simple, profound, and empowering. I wasn't just reclaiming what Marissa had taken from me. I was reclaiming what I had given up. Not for them. For myself. The 30-day deadline approached like a slow-moving storm, predictable, inevitable, and heavy with the promise of consequence. But for me, those 30 days passed like petals falling from a tree, quietly, calmly, with an almost meditative peace. Each day, I did something small that rebuilt me. A coffee at the corner cafe, a new Italian verb mastered, a spreadsheet column organized, a call with Ben finalizing another layer of protection, a walk at sunrise along the river path, a visit to the local animal shelter to observe their operations. These were not distractions. They were foundations. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Marissa and Nolan lived their own unraveling. Not because I monitored them, because the world has a way of bringing news to your doorstep, especially when your doorstep is frequented by neighbors like Lillian. "Oh, Evelyn," she would whisper into the phone. "You won't believe what I just saw." Or, "They had movers there today. 6 bags of clothing, boxes of shoes." Or I walked past and heard them fighting. It wasn't pretty. I listened politely, thanked her, hung up. I did not revel. I did not gloat. I did not feel satisfaction. Just distance. A healthy, necessary distance. The distance of consequences arriving exactly where they belonged. On day 12, Ben called. "It's done," he said. "The villa locks were changed last night. Security reports no unusual activity." "Good." "And the SUV?" I asked. "The recovery team retrieved it at the marina." Nolan tried to argue, but he had no documentation to prove ownership. They had plenty. I exhaled, closing my eyes. "Excellent," And, Ben continued. One more thing, Marissa contacted a lawyer to negotiate a settlement. Exot, I snorted. Of course she did. He called me, Ben said, chuckling. They told him you evicted them out of spite and were financially abusive. And what did you tell him? I told him the truth. Ben replied easily. That they lived rent-free for 8 years. Drove vehicles they didn't own. Misused property. And humiliated the person funding their lifestyle. Also that you had a cognitive evaluation proving full competence. I could practically hear the other attorney choking on his coffee. He withdrew from representing them, Ben added. I burst out laughing. A warm, full laugh. That's the best news I've heard all week, I said. On day 18, I went to the pet shelter again, this time armed with a notebook, a camera, and a detailed list of questions. How many animals do you take each month? What's your average operating cost? What are your biggest challenges? How many volunteers do you need per day? The director, a kind woman named Miriam, with gray streaks in her braids, looked at me with surprise. You're serious about building your own shelter? She said. Yes, I replied steadily. Very. She studied me for a moment. If you're really doing this, it'll change your life. It already has, I whispered. On day 23, I went to the new laptop store and bought a compact tablet for on-the-go planning. The clerk, a young man who looked barely older than Luca had at 16, grinned. Starting a new project, he asked. Yes, I said. A very important one. Good for you, he said. It's never too late to build something. Never too late. I repeated those words silently as I walked home. The cold air crisp in my lungs. On day 27, I received a letter from Marissa's bank. One of my old accounts had been connected to her automatic withdrawals. The letter informed me that several transactions had failed. I smiled thinly. That account only had $1. 200 inches it now. Just enough to show them the emptiness. Just enough to reveal the truth they'd never acknowledged. Nothing in their life was built by them. They had no foundation of their own. And the foundation they stood on, mine, had finally retracted. Day 30 arrived quietly. I made coffee and scrambled eggs. Ate slowly. And then read a few chapters of my Italian textbook. I watered my plants. Scrubbed the kitchen counters. And changed the sheets in the guest room. The room that would soon take on a new meaning. At exactly 5:04 p.m. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a thick brown envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Evelyn Moretti, he said. I signed for it. Thanked him. And closed the door before opening the envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside were the townhouse keys, the villa keys, a garage door opener, a brief, unsigned note reading simply, here. No apology. No explanation. No remorse. Just surrender. I held the keys in my palm. Heavy with history. Not metal memory. Not weight meaning. For years. These properties symbolized the burden I carried, a burden of providing, of enabling, of being needed but never valued. Today, they symbolized something else entirely. Autonomy. Self-respect. Release. I placed them inside a decorative bowl on my coffee table, a bowl Angelo had carved himself. With olive wood we'd bought on a trip to Calabria. He would have loved this moment. He would have said, "Look at you, Evie, finally remembering what you're made of." I touched the rim of the bowl gently, imagining his voice, imagining his smile. And then, slowly, I let myself sit in the fullness of the moment. Marissa and Nolan were gone. Not from the world, not from possibility, but from the throne they'd built on my back. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Lillian, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. They moved, she whispered. They really moved. A rental truck came, A few battered boxes. They stood out on the sidewalk arguing. She was crying. He looked furious. I listened quietly, and then they left. Lillian continued. In an Uber. Can you believe it? The mighty fall. I didn't respond. Evelyn, she said softly. Are you all right? I walked to the window and looked out at the soft pink wash of early evening. I'm perfect, I said, and I meant it, because their departure wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The day after the keys arrived, I woke with a stillness inside me, an unusual quiet. Not the aching quiet of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of completion. The kind of quiet that settles over a field after a long storm. When the wind finally exhales and everything stands still, waiting for new things to grow, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat near the window, watching morning light spill across the hardwood floor. The air smelled clean, like beginnings. I didn't check my phone. I didn't check my email. I didn't look for updates about Marissa and Nolan. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't start my morning anticipating what someone else needed from me. I asked myself what I wanted. The answer came easily. I wanted a life. Not a life built around my daughter's emergencies. Not a life managed around Nolan's simmering entitlement. Not a life interrupted by their wants disguised as needs. A life of my own making, finally. By mid-morning, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom mirror, studying the woman reflected back at me. My new haircut framed my face with purpose. The emerald coat hanging behind me glowed like a small rebellion against every twide. You're too old for that Marissa had ever thrown my way. My skin wasn't flawless. My body wasn't youthful. But my spirit was incandescent. I dressed, grabbed my notes, and headed out. I had an appointment. Not with Ben. Not with a financial advisor. With Renata, Jonah's aunt, the director of the Community Literacy Center. The center sat in a renovated school building. Its entryway lined with rainbow-colored posters, financial freedom for every family. Strong women. Strong futures. Learn today to lead tomorrow. I stepped inside and was immediately greeted by Renata herself, an energetic woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked curls and eyes that radiated sincerity. Evelyn Moretti, she said warmly, shaking my hand with both of hers. Jonah has said so many wonderful things about you. He's a good boy, I replied. He's been a blessing. That he has, she said. And he thought you might be ready for something meaningful. She ushered me into her office. A space filled with books, plants, motivational quotes, and a calendar bursting with programs. So, she said, leaning forward, you want to teach? I shook my head. Not teach. Not yet. I want to help. She smiled. Helping is teaching. What did you have in mind? I slid a folder across her desk, one filled with my handwritten notes. Many women in this community don't know how to manage finances, I said. Not because they lack intelligence, but because no one ever taught them. I want to create a beginner's program. Not lectures. Hands-on. With real skills. She flipped through the folder spreadsheets. Simplified diagrams. Step-by-step guides, her eyes widening. Evelyn, she breathed. This is excellent. It's a start, I said. It's more than a start, she corrected. This is exactly what we need. As she looked up at me, a warmth spread through my chest. Not validation, not ego. Purpose. You know, Renata said thoughtfully, I've worked with hundreds of volunteers, young ones, passionate ones, burnt-out ones, but there's something special about women who reinvent themselves later in life. Special? I asked, amused. Yes, she said firmly. Because reinvention at 20 is expected, reinvention at 40 is applauded, but reinvention at 70. She placed her hand over mine, That's power. I swallowed past the tightness rising in my throat. When can I start? I asked. She smiled like a sunrise. Monday. When I left the literacy center, the sky had opened to a warm afternoon. Children played in the courtyard nearby. Mothers chatted on benches. And the world seemed suddenly full of color I hadn't noticed before. I walked home with renewed energy. My notes clutched to my chest like precious cargo. But halfway up the block, someone called my name. Mrs. Moretti. I turned. It was Lillian, my neighbor. My unofficial town crier. And, surprisingly, one of the first people who had supported me through this transformation. She jogged toward me, out of breath, clutching a grocery bag. "You won't believe what I heard," she said, before even reaching me. I raised an eyebrow. "You say that every time." "No. But this, oh. Evelyn." She lowered her voice, glancing around. "They're living in a rental apartment. A tiny one. Barely big enough for a couple who respects each other. Let alone them." I didn't respond. She continued, unable to contain herself. "And I don't want to gossip, but I heard yelling. A lot of yelling." Again. I didn't react. She studied my face, perhaps searching for hurt, triumph, giddiness, sorrow, something. But all she found was calm. "You're not happy about this," she said slowly. I met her gaze. "No," I replied. "I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to stop hurting me." That seemed to unsettle her more than any gloating would have. "You're a better woman than most," she murmured. "No," I said. "I'm just a woman who's finally learned her worth." She squeezed my hand tightly before heading off. Back home. I spent 2 hours designing a lesson plan for the literacy center. Then I drafted step-by-step instructions for budgeting, created a sample spreadsheet, and even added colorful labels. When I finished, it looked beautiful, useful, practical, empowering, something that could change lives. I printed the first draft and placed it carefully in a binder marked Financial Foundations for Women. When I closed the binder, my heart swelled not from pride, but from the warmth of finally doing something that mattered to me. Not to Marissa, not to Nolan, not to anyone who saw me as a wallet. To me, that night, as I made chamomile tea and looked out at the soft glow of the city lights, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jonah. "Aunt Renata loved your proposal. She told me you lit up the whole room. Proud of you. Proud of me." The words settled into my bones like a healing balm. Sometimes, the family you choose is the one that actually sees you. And sometimes, the family you lose is the price of becoming who you were always meant to be. Winter softened as the weeks passed, giving way to crisp breezes and the first hints of spring. The neighborhood woke earlier, now children riding scooters, neighbors tending to pale green buds in their gardens, dogs tugging at their leashes with renewed energy. I found myself waking earlier too, eager for each morning. My days had purpose again. Mondays through Wednesdays. I worked at the literacy center with Renata. Thursday afternoons, I volunteered at the animal clinic, learning everything from feeding schedules to intake procedures. Fridays, I met Ben to review progress on the sanctuary project. Saturdays, I spent practicing Italian, rolling my R's and learning to articulate vowels properly. Sundays, I rested, truly rested for the first time in decades. Life didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, rich, mine. But even as I found joy in these new routines, a small, quiet ache lingered in the corner of my chest. Not for Marissa. That door had closed without hesitation. But for Luca, I hadn't heard from him in weeks. Part of me understood. He was newly married, newly overwhelmed, newly exposed to the cracks in his parents' lives. The boy inside him was probably sorting through loyalties, guilt, confusion, but still, my heart missed him. So when the doorbell rang one rainy evening, long after sunset, and I looked through the peephole to see Luca standing there, soaking wet, shoulders slumped under the weight of whatever he carried, I froze. Not with fear, with recognition, because grief has a posture, regret has a posture, humility has a posture. He was carrying all three. I opened the door. He looked up slowly, his eyes red, his hair dripping from the rain, his breath visible in the cold air. "Grandma," his voice cracked. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Of course. He walked in like a man who hadn't slept in days. His jeans were muddy at the hem, his shirt wrinkled, his hands trembling slightly. He stood in the entryway, staring down at the floorboards like he expected them to give way beneath him. I closed the door gently behind us. "What happened?" I asked softly. He swallowed hard, then met my eyes. I'm not married anymore." My breath caught. He continued quickly, like ripping the bandage off before he could stop himself. "She left me." "Grandma." I went still. "Giada," I whispered. "She left." He nodded, chest rising and falling too fast. "She said she didn't sign up for this. For the apartment. For the money problems. For" he cut himself short, his voice cracking. "She said I deceived her. That she married the image of me, not the truth." I placed a hand on his arm. "Luca, she was right." He choked out. "She was absolutely right." He covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shuddered. He wasn't crying quietly. He was falling apart. "My parents told her I was heir to a townhouse, a villa, an entire estate," he said between ragged breaths. "They made it sound like I came from money, like I'd take care of her, like she'd never have to worry." I felt a cold, sinking weight in my stomach. Marissa, always performing wealth she did not earn, always building towers out of air, always writing fraudulent narratives with me as the invisible foundation. And when everything fell apart, Luca whispered, she blamed me. She said I was a liar. She packed her things and left a note saying she hoped I'd grow up someday. A note, a leaving, a heartbreak. Oh, Luca. His voice dropped to a whisper, almost childlike. "She married me because she thought I was you," he said. The words hit me like a blow. He lifted wet eyes to mine. "She married me because she thought I had your strength, your stability, your money, your foundation." His voice broke again. But I wasn't any of those things. I moved slowly to him and cupped his cheek with my palm, something I hadn't done since he was a boy. "Sit," I said gently. We walked to the living room and sat together on the sofa. The lamp beside us cast a warm glow, illuminating the exhaustion etched into his expression. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I fought with Mom," he said quietly. "For the first time in my life, I actually confronted her. And," he let out a bitter laugh, "she called you selfish. She said you ruined everything. She blamed you for my marriage falling apart." I exhaled slowly. That sounds like her. But this time I didn't accept it," Luca said fiercely, lifting his eyes to mine. "I told her the truth, that she ruined everything, that her greed poisoned my life, that her lies destroyed my marriage before it even began." My chest tightened, not with regret, but with something warmer, pride. "I walked out," he whispered, "and I don't think I'm going back." "Where have you been staying?" I asked gently. He hesitated, shame flickering across his face. "A friend's couch," he admitted, "but he's moving tomorrow. And I don't have anywhere else." My heart broke just a little, not for the man who had stood silently as I was turned away from his wedding, but for the boy who had once trusted me with his whole heart. The boy who had grown up too close to his parents' selfishness to understand its consequences. The boy who was finally seeing the truth. The guest room. I said softly, "It's yours." His eyes widened, filling instantly with tears. "Grandma, I don't want to be a burden." I placed my hand over his. "Luca," I said, voice firm, warm, unwavering. "You have never been a burden. You made mistakes. But you are not your parents, and you don't have to live like them." He broke then, not with rage, or shame, or bitterness. With relief, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, trembling hug. I held him just as tightly, feeling the old ache in my chest soften, melt, dissolve. "You can stay," I murmured into his hair, but not as someone who is rescued, as someone who is rebuilding. He nodded against my shoulder. "I'll pay my way," he whispered. "I'll work. I'll contribute. I'll do whatever it takes. We'll figure it out," I said, one step at a time. For the first time since the wedding, a sense of renewal began to take root, not just for me, but for him. Breaking a generational cycle is never clean, never gentle, never painless. But in that moment, as Luca cried in my arms, I knew one thing: some cycles are worth breaking. Luca moved into the guest room the very next morning. He arrived at my door early, too early for someone who'd barely slept, and carried 2 duffel bags, a rolled-up blanket, and a cardboard box of loose belongings he hadn't bothered to organize. He looked small somehow. Not physically, he was a tall young man, but spiritually, like a tree struck by lightning. Still standing, but scorched in places. "I'll earn my keep," he said immediately, before he'd even stepped fully inside. "You will," I replied gently, "but not today. Today, you rest." He tried to argue. I didn't let him. I guided him to the guest room, the same one Marissa had once claimed as her own. The same one I'd reclaimed with fresh sheets and sunlight streaming through the curtains. He stood in the doorway, taking it in. "This looks peaceful," he murmured. "It's yours," I said, "for as long as you need." He nodded, swallowed hard, and set his things down carefully, as though he feared breaking something. Later that afternoon, I found him sitting at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen. He was drawing a budget, simple numbers, crossed out estimates, uncertain additions and subtractions, but he was trying. Trying was enough. "May I asked, sliding into the chair across from him. He hesitated, then turned the notebook toward me. What I saw reminded me painfully of a child learning to write his first letters: earnest, sloppy, hopeful. "You're doing well," I said. He exhaled shakily. "I don't know how to budget. Mom always said it was complicated. Dad always said it wasn't my responsibility." I rested my hand over his. "It's never too late to learn." He nodded, eyes glossy. And so we began. We spent that afternoon building a basic budget spreadsheet: income, expenses, savings. Not because he needed perfection, but because he needed a foundation. As we worked, the tension in his shoulders eased, the tightness around his jaw softened, and by the time the sun began to set, Luca leaned back, looking lighter. "I never thought I could do something like this," he said quietly. "People who rely on others for too long forget what they're capable of." I replied. He looked at me, then a long, searching look. "You're nothing like Mom said," he whispered. I raised a brow. "And what did she say?" "That you were fragile, irrational, that you couldn't manage things on your own." I smiled, not with bitterness, but with understanding. "She needed me to be small," I said, "so she didn't have to face how big her own shortcomings were." Luca looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry I believed her." "It's all right," I said. "You're here now." He gave me the smallest, Truest smile I'd seen from him since he was a teenager. Over the next 2 weeks, Luca transformed. Not in grand gestures, not in dramatic sweeps of redemption. In small, meaningful ways. He woke early each morning to jog something he hadn't done in years. He helped me cook dinner, learning how to chop onions without crying. He cleaned the house without being asked. He attended therapy sessions through a program I recommended. He learned to make his own coffee, terrible coffee. But coffee he made himself. He applied for jobs, internships, and remote graphic design work. He started freelancing within a week. The first time he earned $120 from a design project. He came home beaming, waving the confirmation email like a child who'd won a school award. "Grandma," he said breathlessly, "I made this myself." I hugged him tight. "You did." He paid the electric bill without me asking. "You don't have to," I began. "I want to." He cut in. "I want to stand on my own 2 feet." That was when I knew the cycle was breaking. One evening, after a quiet dinner of roasted vegetables and garlic pasta, Luca set his fork down and looked at me in a way that told me something important was coming. "Grandma," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When did you become this strong?" The question hit me deep. I thought of my girlhood, my marriage, my widowhood, the years of shrinking myself to fit the narrow spaces Marissa allowed, the humiliation at the wedding, the rebirth that followed. "I didn't become strong," I said slowly. "I remembered that I always was." He swallowed hard. "Do you think I could be like you, eventually?" I reached out, brushed a lock of hair off his forehead, the same gesture I'd done when he was 5, 6, 7. "You already are," I whispered. His eyes shimmered with emotion. 2 nights later, Jonah visited to help me update the sanctuary plans. He greeted Luca warmly. They'd met once or twice when Luca was younger, and the 3 of us talked well into the evening. Jonah showed Luca how to use modern design software. Luca taught Jonah how to make the garlic pasta he'd just learned. I watched them, heart full, realizing I'd created something I thought I'd lost: community, chosen family. After Jonah left, Luca lingered in the living room doorway. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I want to help you build the sanctuary." I blinked. "You want to work with me?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I want to build something good, something real, something bigger than all the broken pieces behind us." The weight of that promise, his sincerity, hit me in a place deeper than pride. "Then we will," I said. "Together?" And in that moment, standing in the warm glow of the lamp, the house quiet around us, I realized something profound. I hadn't just rebuilt myself. I was helping rebuild him too. And maybe, just maybe, we were both meant to rise from the same fire. Spring arrived quietly, the way healing often does, slow at first. Then all at once, trees budded with soft green leaves. The air warmed just enough to coax people outside again. And the sun lingered a little longer each evening. Life, it seemed, had decided it was time for renewal. I felt that renewal in my bones. Every morning, I woke to the scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen, Luca's new ritual. He wasn't great at it, but he was getting better. He'd set 2 mugs on the table, one for me, one for himself, and we'd drink in comfortable silence before starting our days. He found steady work freelancing as a graphic designer. His confidence grew with each project. He started speaking with more certainty, standing taller, smiling more often. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the boy he used to be: curious, gentle, creative. Other times I saw the man he was becoming, one who chose integrity over convenience, responsibility over denial. As for me, I became something new, too. Not the woman who had been left off a guest list. Not the woman who tore a lavender silk dress in despair. Not the woman who lived her life in the shadow of her daughter's entitlement. I became the woman I used to be, the woman Angelo loved. The woman who built things. The woman who led without apology. But I also became someone I had never been before. A woman who loved herself enough to walk away from those who didn't. The Moretti Haven Animal Sanctuary officially began construction 3 months after Marissa and Nolan moved out of the townhouse. The land I purchased was a peaceful 5-acre plot near Collins Bay rolling meadows. Scattered trees. A small stream running through the back. When I first visited the site, accompanied by Ben, Jonah, and Luca, the wind moved through the grass like a whispered blessing. "This is beautiful," Luca murmured, taking it all in. "It will be," I said, imagining it fenced dog yards with soft turf, cat cottages with windows and sun shelves, a converted barn for small animals, a warm, welcoming volunteer center, gardens planted with herbs and flowers, a place where broken creatures could heal, a place where I could heal, too. Ben reviewed the paperwork on a clipboard. "We can break ground in 2 weeks," he said. Jonah grinned. "And the shelter's website I built for you already has 50 volunteers interested." My eyes stung. Support, community, momentum, all of it growing from the ashes of what I lost. Luca slipped his arm through mine. "Grandma, this is going to change so many lives." And for the first time, I let myself believe it. On the sanctuary's opening day, the sky was an endless blue, the kind of sky Angelo would have pointed at and said, "That's a sky for beginnings." The wind carried the scent of fresh pine and new grass. A banner stretched across the front gate. Moretti Haven, a place for second chances. I stood beneath it in a simple cream suit, my pearl necklace resting softly against my collarbone. My new haircut moved gently in the breeze. Guests gathered, volunteers, neighbors, donors, community leaders. Even the mayor attended, delivering a short but heartfelt speech about the importance of compassion and community service. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped forward, my hands steady on the wooden podium Luca had built with his own hands. "Thank you," I began, "for being here today, for believing in this dream with me." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the crowd. Some of you know pieces of my story. Many of you do not. But I will tell you this: not long ago, I reached the lowest point of my life. I was humiliated, dismissed, forgotten. And for a moment, just a moment, I believed I had lost everything. A hush fell over the crowd. "But life has a way of surprising us," I continued. "Sometimes, when the world closes a door, it's because you were never meant to walk through it in the first place. Sometimes the place you're being led to is far bigger, far kinder, far more important than the place you left." I felt tears rise but refused to let them fall. "This sanctuary," I said, voice softening, "is proof that what breaks us can also remake us. That dignity is not something we lose, it's something we reclaim. That it is never too late to choose a different life." I looked to Jonah, who smiled proudly, to Renata, who nodded with shining eyes, to Ben, standing with his arms crossed, the expression of a man who had seen someone resurrect herself, and finally, to Luca, who stood near the first dog enclosure, his eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "This is a place for second chances," I said, "not just for the animals, but for all of us." When I stepped away from the podium, applause rose like a wave, warm, sincere, alive. Hours later, after the ribbon cutting, after the guests had toured the sanctuary and left, after the chatter had died down, I found myself standing alone near the outer fence. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden rays across the property. Birds chirped in the nearby trees. The world felt soft. Luca approached quietly, hands in his pockets. "You did something amazing today." "Grandma." "We did," I corrected gently. He looked out across the sanctuary grounds. I feel like this place saved me. It saved me too, I said. He turned to me then, his expression open, vulnerable. I know I hurt you, he whispered. I know I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I know I was blind. I'm sorry. I placed a hand on his cheek. Apologizing means nothing, I said. Changing means everything. He nodded, eyes glistening. And you've changed. Luca. He leaned forward and hugged me, an embrace filled not with sorrow, but with new beginnings. When he pulled away, he smiled. You know, he said lightly, Mom and Dad still say you ruined their lives. I laughed softly. They ruined their own lives. I simply stepped out of the way. He grinned. The first genuine, carefree smile I'd seen from him since childhood. Grandma, he said, I'm proud of you. I inhaled deeply. Those words landed differently than they did from others. They filled a lifelong gap, a void I didn't realize still lingered. Thank you. Sweetheart, I said. That means everything. We watched the sun set over the sanctuary, its golden light bathing the fields, the fences, the fresh beginnings.